The 1920s was a time of prosperity and happiness. However, there was turmoil boiling beneath the surface. This decade was full of changing perspectives on women, African Americans, and immigrants. With the rise in the immigrant population, there was also a rise in hate groups such as the KKK. There was also a downfall during the Prohibition era, reflected in the rise in bootleggers and crime. These events reflect the same modern-day issues we have today, evidence that history really does repeat itself. The 1920s saw a rise in women rebelling against the norms, and thus a rise in women's rights. Flappers, women who dressed scandalously, smoked, and drank, became famous for their disobeyment of traditional women's roles and acted as icons for women to come. With the passage of the 19th Amendment, women gained more rights than ever before. Jobs increased. Women moved to positions in domestic service, manufacturing, clerical sales, and management. These ideas continued throughout future generations, and the basis of feminism can be traced back to this era. Today, we see a similar fire beneath the increasing rights of women, especially through the feminist movement. Feminism is defined as the belief in social, economic, and political equality of the sexes. The feminism movement is in opposition of stereotypes of women as passive, weak, slutty, emasculating, and has redefined women as smart, powerful, and assertive. Similar to the flappers during the 1920s, women such as Madonna, Miley Cyrus, and Queen Latifah go against the stereotypes of women and promote their ideas of feminism. African Americans, like women, gained more rights than ever before. African Americans began migrating north in search of new job opportunities. However, many faced opposition and discrimination from the whites. Harlem, New York became a hotbed for migrant African Americans and was looked upon as a holy land in which they aspired to reach. Some 200,000 blacks settled in Harlem, along with others from different regions of the world, such as Jamaica and Haiti, creating a blend of different cultures and traditions. This blend of African American cultures cultivated a new perspective on the race and its influence on the world. Marcus Garvey praised the separation of races, teaching African Americans to admire black things and black people. No longer would African Americans assimilate into white culture. Instead, they would show their culture to the world. Garvey's words inspired African Americans to celebrate their backgrounds, leading into what we now know as the Harlem Renaissance. African Americans brought advancements in art, literature, and music, creating a new appreciation for African Americans and their culture. The impact of the Harlem Renaissance is continuously present today, as African Americans look back to their past to recognize their influence on the world of art. Following the Harlem Renaissance, many movements towards equality for races, specifically for African Americans, emerged. Today, the main movement towards racial equality for African Americans is the Black Lives Matter movement. The group focuses on building local power, intervening in violence in black communities to meet their goals. The group works mainly through protesting against police killings and brutality, racial profiling, and racial inequality in the justice system. Originally, the movement took off in the city of Ferguson, where they caught the nation's attention and created a member-led community bonded together by their beliefs. Like migrant African Americans, immigrants also entered the country with the hope to create a better life with new job opportunities in the U.S. However, with a rise in immigration, the United States needed to propose a quota system in order to govern the amount of immigrants entering the country. From the quota system, a new act emerged, the National Ordinance Act. This act restricted the number of immigrants of a certain nationality. It appeared fair on the surface, yet the act was actually unjust. More England and Northern Ireland-born immigrants were allowed than Italian immigrants, and Asian immigrants were completely excluded. Mexican immigrants arrived for economic opportunities, and even today compete with Americans for jobs in the U.S. In current politics, the topic of immigration is prevalent, especially with the different bans President Trump has placed or attempted to put in place during his presidency. Trump's call to reduce immigration was seen when he issued a Muslim ban, which temporarily suspended immigration to the United States from 7 Muslim-majority countries. Following that ban, Trump issued a version of the ban that continued to apply to immigrants from Muslim countries, but now included immigration from foreign countries. In April 2018, the Trump administration adopted what is called a zero-tolerance policy. The policy caused the Department of Justice to criminally prosecute all suspected illegal border crossers for illegal entry, even those who crossed for the first time. This caused families to undergo separations when parents or adult relatives were charged with unlawful entry and started to rip families apart. Following the rise of immigration, the 1920s was the first time the United States saw a drastic increase in the amount of hate groups populating cities all over the nation. Famous for the prosecution of innocent people, the Ku Klux Klan, or more widely known as the KKK, became a popular hate group that discriminated against every race, nationality, and religion that wasn't white or Christian. Located mostly in the South, the KKK had 4.5 million members nationwide. Although their numbers aren't as large today, the KKK has split up into different sectors that target select races, religions, and nationalities. In the U.S., there are around 1,020 hate groups throughout the country, many taking place just outside major cities. One of the more prominent hate groups today is the Aryan Nations that was founded in the 1970s and was a combination of the neo-Nazis, skinheads, the KKK, white supremacists, and militia groups. The group was compounded in Hayden Lake, Idaho, originally led by a man named Butler, who began hosting annual conferences in the city to discuss and plan acts of hate. Despite once having a lot of support, the size of the group has lessened as people realize the fault in hate groups. In addition, the group lost many members to imprisonment as a result of their actions and lost a few of their main leaders to death. Although hate groups were responsible for a majority of the crime that occurred in the U.S., gangsters contributed to the growing crime rates throughout the 1920s as well. With the approval of the 18th Amendment, the United States saw growth in organized crime and bootlegging. Bootlegging is the act of smuggling alcohol into the country and illegally selling it to consumers in the United States. One of the most famous bootleggers from the 1920s is none other than Al Capone. Nicknamed Scarface, Al Capone was a Chicago gang leader known for his illegal actions during the Prohibition era. Over the span of 10 years, crime increased exponentially. Arrests for violating Prohibition laws grew by 102%. Arrests for drunkenness and disorderly conduct grew by 41%. Arrests for drunk driving increased by 81%. And, most shockingly, the federal prison population grew by 366%. These statistics illustrated the need for change, and thus the 18th Amendment was revoked. Similar to Al Capone, Pablo Escobar is known for his involvement in crime, specifically the production and transport of cocaine out of Colombia and into the United States. Pablo Escobar was the leader of the Medellin Cartel, an organization that smuggled cocaine into the United States illegally. The cartel started when the Colombian marijuana traffickers began smuggling small amounts of cocaine into the States, and the high demand for more cocaine led to the expansion of trade and the rapid growth of the cartel. Escobar made millions of dollars off of smuggling of drugs in the United States, but eventually was shot dead after the government sent out a manhunt to kill him. Much like the bootleggers in the 1920s, the Medellin cartel smuggled drugs into the United States and sold the products illegally with great profit margins. Although the 1920s brought many advancements in areas of much-needed improvement, the decade was also flowering with crime, hate groups, and discrimination. As we approach the century mark, we realize that the connections between each decade share many similarities, if not completely identical. Current-day issues are the same as before, leading us to question if history really does repeat itself.